They called it the Ship of Dreams, a floating palace built for kings, presidents, and titans of wealth. But beneath its chandeliers and champagne was something colder, something deliberate. The arms Titanic wasn't just a marvel of engineering. It was a stage. And if you follow the money, the names, and the strange silences around its maiden voyage, that stage starts to look more like a trap. April 1912. Three of the most powerful men in America boarded the Titanic: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus. Steel magnates, retail empires, banking adversaries. Together, they controlled billions in today's money, and together, they shared one dangerous belief: that a central banking system, controlled by private hands, was a threat to the Republic. They were vocal, respected, unshakable, and all three died at sea, just days after departure. Meanwhile, the man who built the shipping empire behind the Titanic, financier J.P. Morgan, backed out of the voyage at the very last minute. His private suite was already stocked with cigars, fine linens, and French decor. His luggage was on board. His name was printed on the manifest. But just 24 hours before departure, he vanished. No illness, no statement, just gone. He was later spotted walking the streets of Aix-les-Bains, France, healthy, shopping, smiling. This wasn't just bad timing, it was surgical. Morgan had the means, the motive, and the foresight to avoid the icy grave his rivals never saw coming. And when the Titanic slipped beneath the Atlantic, it didn't just bury 1,500 souls. It cleared the path for a financial revolution. Months later, with Astor, Guggenheim, and Straus conveniently out of the way, the Federal Reserve Act slid through Congress on a quiet December day, while most lawmakers were home for the holidays. No debate, no resistance, just a signature, and the beginning of a private central bank with the power to print, lend, and control the very lifeblood of the American economy. The same institution the dead men had fought to stop. Coincidence? History calls it that. But the deeper you dig, the colder it gets, and the more this begins to look like a kill switch wrapped in white linen. The ship that vanished wasn't just the largest ever built. It was supposedly unsinkable. That word, unsinkable, echoed across headlines, selling tickets and sealing fate. But what if the real lie wasn't in the ship's strength, but in its identity? Just a year before the Titanic sailed, her sister ship, the Arms Olympic, suffered a catastrophic collision with a British Navy cruiser. Its hull was mangled, its keel twisted, and its insurability? Gone. Even after repairs, it was clear no investor would ever touch it again. But from the outside, the Olympic and Titanic were nearly identical. Same decks, same dimensions, same layout. To the public, they were twins. To insiders, they were interchangeable assets. And that's when the whispers begin. What if the Olympic, broken and bleeding money, was quietly disguised as the Titanic, rebranded, repainted, and sent on a one-way voyage to the ocean floor to collect an enormous insurance payout? What if the most famous shipwreck in history wasn't just a tragedy, but a fraud of global scale? Divers who visited the wreck over the years have reported markings inconsistent with Titanic's construction blueprints. Some brass nameplates appear to have been swapped. Certain areas of the ship, staircases, cabin finishes, even porthole patterns, don't align with Titanic's original design. Even recovered lifeboats bore faint markings with the name Olympic, half sanded away, like a disguise gone lazy. But the smoking gun may be in the paperwork. Weeks before the voyage, strange movements occurred between the two ships. Maintenance logs were altered, parts were swapped, certain records were sealed. And J.P. Morgan, who owned the White Star Line through his International Mercantile Marine Company, oversaw it all. Now ask yourself, why would one of the world's most ruthless financiers cancel his voyage at the very last moment, but allow three of his most powerful financial rivals to sail instead? Why would a damaged ship, declared unprofitable, suddenly receive a full makeover, only to sink on its first run? It wasn't just about collecting insurance. It was about eliminating resistance and replacing a financial system with something darker. The iceberg was real, but the silence around it, that's what haunts historians the most. In the hours leading up to the disaster, at least 6 nearby ships sent iceberg warnings directly to the Titanic. Some were explicit, naming exact coordinates. One even reported a large field of ice directly along Titanic's path, but somehow, not a single message made it to the bridge. The official story claims the wireless operators were too busy handling passenger telegrams. But these were professional crews trained for emergencies. Why would warnings about deadly ice be pushed aside for first-class social chatter? Why did the wireless logs suddenly go missing after the investigation? Why were some of the messages later found, rewritten in a different hand? The mystery deepens with the nearby ship called the Californian. She was close, some say close enough to save everyone. Her crew saw the Titanic's distress flares, white rockets exploding in the night sky. But their captain did nothing. He claimed the flares didn't look urgent, that the Titanic didn't seem to be in trouble. And yet, he never reached out, never sailed closer, never even woke his wireless operator until it was too late. Then comes the most chilling part. Survivors reported seeing another ship on the horizon. A dark shape sitting motionless in the water, lights dimmed, ignoring the flares. It wasn't the Californian. And it wasn't on any official log. To this day, that mystery ship has never been identified. Some say it was a coal freighter. Others say it was something else entirely, a ghost vessel sent not to help, but to ensure no one interfered. And what about the lifeboats? There were 20 aboard, enough for only half the passengers. But even those weren't filled. Some launched with barely a dozen people inside. First-class women and children floated away in silence, while hundreds were left behind. Chaos reigned, but it wasn't just panic. It was confusion. Lifeboat drills had been canceled. The crew hadn't been trained. And the officers gave conflicting orders. Some told passengers to stay, others told them to run. It felt like no one was in charge, or like someone had made sure of that. These aren't just historical footnotes. They're fingerprints. Evidence that the disaster wasn't natural. It was engineered, a slow-motion execution hidden behind the veil of fog and salt water. And in the silence of that cold Atlantic night, with warnings ignored, flares unanswered, and help mysteriously absent, a new kind of power was taking its first breath. 8 months after the Titanic vanished beneath the Atlantic, another kind of vessel emerged, not from the sea, but from the halls of Congress. It was called the Federal Reserve Act, and unlike the Titanic, it didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. Because it passed on December 23rd, 1913, a quiet holiday week when most lawmakers were home. Only a few senators remained. The vote was rushed. Debate was minimal. The bill sailed through almost unnoticed. But what it carried would shift the world. The act created a private banking consortium with the power to print America's money, control interest rates, and steer the entire financial system. It was marketed as protection, a safeguard against future crises. But behind the curtain, it placed the keys to the U.S. economy into the hands of unelected men. Men like J.P. Morgan, who had long pushed for centralized control, and with the Titanic's biggest opponents, Astor, Strauss, Guggenheim, conveniently buried beneath the sea, there was no one left to slow it down. Morgan's influence grew. His web of banks became arteries feeding into the Fed's core. The Rothschilds, who had long maintained global banking ties, gained deeper leverage, and soon war broke out in Europe. A war that would need massive funding, massive debt, and a Federal Reserve willing to print both. The pieces fit too neatly. The timing, too perfect. a disaster at sea, followed by a silent financial revolution on land. And yet, almost no one connected the dots, because while the world mourned a maritime tragedy, a new financial empire was quietly rising from the wreckage. One not built on stone or steel, but on silence, and the absence of those who once stood in the way. More than a century later, the Titanic still lies in frozen silence. But the questions haven't gone quiet. If anything, they've grown louder. Why were so many lifeboats left half empty when hundreds more could have been saved? Why did wireless messages from nearby ships warning of icebergs never reach the bridge? Why was there a mystery vessel spotted on the horizon, close enough to see distress flares, yet never identified? Never responding, just watching? Why did so many high-profile passengers cancel just days before departure? And why were lifeboats recovered from the wreck bearing the name Olympic? Survivors described odd decor inconsistencies, blueprints that didn't match, crew confusion that felt more like sabotage than miscommunication. And why, even now, are key sections of the Titanic's plans sealed, and some investigation records kept classified? These aren't cracks in the hull, they're cracks in the story, and they refuse to close. The Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a stage. And when you look closely, it begins to resemble something far more chilling. A setup so precise, so convenient for a select few, that it doesn't feel like coincidence anymore. Three of the most powerful men standing in the way of a centralized banking system, dead. The man who funded the ship, controlled the company, and shaped the passenger list, absent. A twin ship with a financial death sentence, quietly switched, insured, and possibly sunk for profit. Within 8 months, a holiday-distracted Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, handing control of America's currency to private bankers, the very outcome Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss had tried to stop. It all unfolded like a script: eliminate opposition, bury the evidence, reset the system. And whether it was an iceberg, a switch, or something even darker, the result was the same. The rise of an invisible empire, built not on gold, but on the bodies left behind in the Atlantic. Maybe the real tragedy of the Titanic wasn't how it sank. Maybe it's how perfectly it worked.